Colonialism is the practice of controlling another country or area and exploiting its people and resources. So, from the early 15th century to the early 17th century, most colonization around the world was by European powers such as Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and others. So, during this time, there was a lot of competition between the European countries. They compete with each other for wealth and land, and they also wanted to discover new places, find valuable resources like gold and spice, and become more powerful than those they compete with. And this period is often called the age of exploration. So, at first, it was just about exploring, but then everything changed when they found places that were rich in natural resources. So, they realized that they could take over the lands and get rich from it. And they also saw places that were rich in rubber, gold, tin, and other resources. And that is how colonialism started across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. So, they decided to not just trade, but control this area in order to get rich and also spread their culture and religion.
First of all, I would like to present on the reason of colonialism, how could it affect to social and cultural aspect. As we all know, the education plays a crucial role in shaping social structures. The colonial rulers has introduced the Western-style education and cultural values to the land they govern, influencing social norms and also local transition. For example, the British, they prioritized the English language education and spread of Western values in the nation. However, colonial rules introduced the significant changes which affected all aspects of local life, including education, language, and also societal structures. The reason for colonialism including introducing language and education to the local population, which introduced the English language. Indigenous education, which is Malay, was replaced with Western subjects, and local encouraged to speak the colonial language in order to create a workforce that support the colonial governance and trade. From the colonial perspective, English can promote trade and global connection, allowing the locals to work more effectively with international markets and also to expand in global business. As a result, colonial education can weaken the indigenous knowledge system. Other than that, colonialism has aimed to spread of Western values and culture to the local population. Missionaries plays a key role in promoting Christianity, which influenced local belief and practices. Colonial rulers has aimed to replace indigenous tradition with Western values, shaping societal perspective to align with colonial governance. This result in traditional religious practice become even weaker as Christianity gained influence. And that is all from me.
Economic exploitation firstly started when British East India Company focuses on trading at Penang, Malacca, and Singapore, or known as the Strait Settlements. While these places were their target, it was to secure military dominance, and those places could further expand the company's trading networks with countries like China and India. However, trading purposes became the colonial expansion of the Bunker Treaty of 1874. This treaty was between the British government and Raja of Dover. After the Treaty of 1874, the British resident system could be implemented starting in Perak, and also Raja of Dover could become a king. In order to exploit Malaya's economy, the colonizers did many ways to achieve that. One of them is transforming traditional customs and legal structure. With this transformation, the British could access Malaya's finance management easier by adapting Malaya's customary rules into European style. From hereafter, Malay peasants could finally have ownerships on land. Consequently, this is also another mischief plan for British to earn side income in the shape of taxes. People had to pay taxes for hunting, entertainment in rural areas, and jungle clearance. Moving on to the next point is Malaya as a profitable location. Why Malaya is considered as a perfect place for profits? That was because of the climate and its interior land that provides easy access for trading activities. In addition to that, economic exploitation became more progressive because at that time, British was competing for mass rubber demand with the United States in Brazil. Because of that, 60% of rubber production in Malaya was handled by 5 British companies. The last point but not least, natural resources were also extracted as a part of economic exploitation's plan. Malaya was an achiever in producing and exporting tin and rubber. Malaya was also considered as a favorable country to extract natural resources like spices and teas. Malaya's colonizers didn't need to spend massive expenses in governing Malaya, but the British government needed to spend more during communism conflict in 1948 until 1960.
Next is political and strategic reason. So politically, when a country has many colonies, it will be seen as a powerful, strong, and important country at that time. So when a country has colonies, they will have more power and control in world politics. For the strategic reason, they will more about location, safety, and control. So some places were taken over because of their location, especially those places that are located near ocean, rivers, or important sea routes. For example, during the British colonialism in Malaya. So in the late 1700s, the British began colonizing parts of Malaya, mainly for strategic and political reasons. So one of the key strategic reasons was to control the Strait of Malacca, which is one of the busiest and most important sea routes in the world. It lies between Malaysia and Indonesia and connects the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. So because of this, many ships from Europe, China, and India and other places pass through to trade goods like spices and textiles. So to take control of this trade route, the British took over Penang, Singapore, and Malacca, which are important ports along the strait. So by doing this, they could collect taxes from passing ships and protect their trade, especially with China. So politically, the British wanted to control the local rulers in Malaya. At that time, states like Perak and Selangor were having conflicts, especially over tin mining. There were fights between Malay rulers and Chinese miners, and this caused violence and made the mining areas unsafe. The British were worried because they had business and investment in those areas, and the conflict was affecting their profits. So the British used this chance to step in. They offered to help and solve the fights, but they also saw a chance to take political control.
Okay, so historically, Western powers were always several steps ahead in terms of technology, especially during the pre-colonial and colonial periods. One of the most significant breakthroughs was steam power, first introduced in the late 17th century and developed further in the 18th century. Steam technology really revolutionized transportation. The first steam-powered boat appeared in 1812, but it wasn't until the 1840s to 1870s that the West began using steamships for colonization, including in Malaya. These ships were faster, more efficient, and capable of carrying more troops and supply compared to traditional wind-powered vessels. Besides ships, steam-powered trade also played a key role. Originating in America, the technology spread to Europe and was later introduced in Malaya. The British built the first steam train in Taiping, Perak, primarily to exploit the growing tin mining industry there. The second technological advancement is obviously military advancements. Even before the Brits, the Dutch, and the Portuguese even colonized Malaya, their weaponry and their naval power has already been much more powerful and advanced than us. Back then, the local warriors of Malaya only used handheld weapons like keris and their martial art silat. Meanwhile, the Brits already have a Gatling hand-cracked gun that was used during the Anglo-Zulu War and a Maxim gun that can shoot 600 rounds per minute in Bedouin. And based on my first point earlier I talked about, the West managed to utilize the steam power by using them on naval ships. With this technology, they also managed to build the ships using iron instead of regular woods. The best example I can give is the Perak War. It was when the British wanted to avenge the assassination of J.W.W. Birch, who was the first British resident in Perak. The Brits launched a coordinated attacks towards the locals. The Brits using rifles and cannons, while the locals using crates and outdated muskets, which obviously gives an unfair advantage towards the local. And no surprise, the locals lost. This honestly perfectly illustrates how military technology gave colonial powers the upper hand. Thirdly is medicine. Before the West came to Malaya, the locals heavily depended on traditional medicines. When the West arrives, they also bring their new medicines, which is much more advanced, so the demands are high. But during the British ruling in Perak, between 1911 and 1939, health institutions and hospitals in Malaya were utilized as the tools to strengthen colonial authority and support economic exploitation. Last but not least, communication advancements. Back then, there were many ways of communication used during the colonialism era. For long-distance communication, they're using fire, smokes, drums, and etc. And for short-distance communication, they're using things like torches and flags. But as the empire expand, the communication become much harder. So what they do? They introduce the first electronic telegraph. This technology was used widely in the colonialism era. The first telegraph that was introduced in Malaya was at Kuala Kangsar, Perak. It was used to connect the British resident in Kuala Kangsar with the deputy British resident in Taipei. So, as we can see, technological advancements was not just a factor, it was a driving force that enabled and sustained Western colonialism in places like Malaya. That's all from me. To conclude this whole thing, colonialism wasn't just about taking lands. It was about power, profit and control. While it brought things like roads and school, it also destroyed cultures, took away freedom and created deep economic gaps that still affect us today. To move forward, we need to understand this history honestly and learn from it. That's all from us. Thank you so much.